gentlemen, we apologize for the semi-awkward start. We've had some technical issues with getting rolling, but nevertheless, we are still here live. It is Monday evening, October 25th. My name is Sean Phillips, and today I am joined, as usual, by my co-host, Mr. Andy VanBebber, and our very special guest, Andy's brother, Mr. Tim VanBebber. How are you doing today?
Doing just fine, thank you.
And before we start, we're taking it off the table. No stories about how he changed my diaper when I was growing up and all that crap. We're going to keep that off the table tonight. None of that's going to be discussed. We're not going to talk about
You don't want me to talk about what
none of that.
when mom was pregnant with you?
No, we're not going to go through we're not going to go through any of that. No.
Oh, it's another boy. I wanted a girl.
Yeah. Yes.
Well, and that's what she got when he came out. So,
thank you, Sean.
I'm here for you, buddy.
Yeah, my brother Tim. Tim, tell us about where you live at and what your occupation is and all that good stuff.
I live in Sedalia, Missouri, and I am a service coordinator, case manager for people with developmental disabilities. I connect them to services and then monitor that their services meet Medicaid guidelines. I've been doing that for 12 years, but I've been working with people with disabilities for 21.
Yep. And my brother Tim, so Tim is the oldest and I am the youngest. And I'm trying to think, how old are you, Tim? Let's see,
I'm 15 and a half years old.
15. So my brother's 62. And, but I was kind of the oops baby, and Tim was the firstborn, and I was the surprise. So, but I asked him this morning, thank you for doing this at the last minute, brother. But we wanted to continue on this week with our thanks again to the boys from Four Deep Sports last week. We had a great show with them, and
absolutely,
we according to Facebook, that was our highest watched and downloaded and restreamed podcast that we've done. So that was
awesome.
That was great to hear that. But the week before that, we'd been doing a series on division, and we invited my brother on tonight. This is kind of the probably the last of our series on this, unless we can come up with something else. But I titled tonight's broadcast "Okay, Boomer." One of the greatest. Yes. Okay, because one of the things that we deal with, I think, we have such a generational, because people are living longer now more than ever. The average male lifespan is now up to, I believe, 76 years of age, and when I was younger, it was 70. People are living longer, they're living healthier, and we've got the greatest gap of generations that we have ever had. Just to give you guys a little bit of a background here. So we have what's called the Greatest Generation. Now, the Greatest Generation, as Great Depression and World War II survivors, they were instrumental in shaping the United States into an economic and military power. Then we had what's called the Silent Generation. We'll get more into this here in a second, but the Silent Generation was born 1928 to 1945, and older members of the Silent Generation fought in Korea, while younger ones were into the civil rights movement and the new frontier generation of President Kennedy. Then we have the baby boomers. They witnessed increasing social and economic equality, came of age in the country that was split of differing views of politics, wars, social justice. Then we have Generation X. Oh, by the way, so my brother Tim falls in the boomer generation. I'm part of Generation X, born between 1965 and 1990. Gen Xers grew up with emerging technologies, political and institutional incompetence. They witnessed Watergate, 3 Mile Island, and the Iranian hostage crisis, and the fall of communism. And then we have what's called Generation Z, also known as the plurals, the centennials. Generation Z, some interesting stats about them. they call them the plurals, and a little thing about them. The plurals are smaller in number than the millennials and Gen Xers before them, but they're poised to wield a great deal of financial power, making up 40%. They will make up 40% of the nation's consumers when they reach adulthood at age 18. They're proving difficult to identify in terms of overreaching trends. Plurals are called so-called because of the pluralistic society that's growing and developing as they come of age. Plurals are determined to be open-minded and accepting of a wide variety of viewpoints, opinions, and identities. They're difficult to categorize because they don't want to be categorized as the most diverse generation in history of the United States. So when we really break this down, and I base this off of some of you guys are familiar with the Pew Research Institute, and they released this nice big thick study not too long ago on the generation gap in American politics. And I just want to go through a few of these things, and we'll kind of get everybody's feel on this. But what the Pew Research did on was a variety of areas, from political approval to gay marriage to race relations to immigrants to foreign policy to American standing in the world to governmental trust, and then to religion. One generalized fact that I do want to mention before we start says across all four generational, and we'll just get your guys' opinion with this right up the bat. It says across all four generational eras, more express either consistently liberal or mostly liberal opinions across the 10 items than they did 6 years ago. The issues that I just mentioned. How do you guys feel about that? I mean, do you think that we're becoming a more liberal-minded group of people, or is that just some kind of research? By the way, they interviewed 10% of the American population, which was 35. That's the study size, and they interviewed 35,000 different people with this research.
You talking about across generations?
Yes, they think
as a society, we becoming more liberal.
Yes. What do you think about that?
You're asking me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I don't know. Where I'm sitting, the people that I'm around, where I'm sitting at is pretty darn conservative. I mean, not necessarily myself all the time, but of course I'm in. Well, it's Sedalia, but it's rural Missouri. You know.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if I go to Kansas City, or if I go to St. Louis, you know, or definitely Columbia, you're going to find some different opinions.
Mm-hmm.
But rural Missouri pretty much is pretty darn conservative. But of course, I'm not living in New England.
Right.
I'm not living in L.A.
Well, according to this study that they did, I mean, they tried to get a good cross member of people from Plain States, Midwest, West, and East, and so they were trying to. But Sean, what do you think? I mean, do you see where do you see us at?
I always think it comes down to like where do they do these studies? Where are they interviewing? I would say yes. Now, there's a couple of different reasons that go into this. For better or worse, and I'm trying to figure out how to not mince my words with this, but I feel like some people, not all, but some people might have adapted or have changed previous thoughts, views, whatever it might be, maybe to prevent themselves from being like out of the loop or like out of conversations that some people are having. I definitely think as a society we are adapting, where things 10 years ago that might be considered taboo now. It's hard because I think like a lot of the ideology is still there, but it's it's weird. People don't want to be quote unquote canceled anymore. So are they changing the way they believe, or are they just kind of doing the more like silent majority thing, where like people are just kind of keeping their thoughts, comments, concerns to themselves, whereas before like they might have spoken more freely. I don't know. I would say as a society on certain social issues, yes, yeah, 100%.
Well, when you look at, so let's go ahead and look at some of these issues. This report was published at the last month of Trump's. If we have time, we can get back to it. But it was at the last month of Trump's presidency, and so they asked that as a question. But we'll come back to it. It's a generations divide on range of political attitudes. So with the issue of gay marriage, millennials have been and remain most supportive of same-sex marriage, followed by Gen Xers, Boomers, and silence. Yet the generational differences has held fairly consistent over this period, even as all four areas have grown more supportive of gays and lesbians being allowed to marry legally. And, part of this, and Tim and I have had this discussion many times, well, Sean, I forgot to tell you too, Tim, that Sean's a PK as well. But what we were raised, all three of us were raised up in our early generation was, you looked at gay marriage as, okay, this is something, oh my goodness, and it's what gave I think the church said, oh, that's the enemy and we're the, but and with that, and we'll get into religion here in a little bit, but with that, I think that generations are starting to say, okay, this is a part of our society. I don't know, my generation, I think I think Gen Xers are just, we're starting to say it's a fact of life, and we need to accept it and move on with it. We don't need to approve of it, but we need to support. We still love the people who are, even though we don't agree with it, we still, we don't have to support the measure. But I don't know, Tim, what's your thoughts on that?
We all work with gay people, don't we?
Yeah.
I do.
Yeah,
I've worked with gay people. I was taught, basically. If you want to go to religion, well, I hate use for me. It's not just necessarily religion, but my faith taught me that you make choices and you can make wrong choices, and basically called it sin. But I was always taught to accept people even if they're different than me. But when I was in high school, if you were gay, man, you were out. I mean, you didn't talk about it, and then
and just for basis for reference, what year did you graduate, Tim?
1977.
Okay.
Did we have gay people in my school? I'm sure that we did, but they sure didn't come out of the closet. Today, I mean, it's more accepted than ever. And the thing of it is, it's kind of like gay marriage being legalized and stuff. We're never going back. No. It's not ever. It's not. They're not going to say, "Well, it's illegal now." No, it's not. That's not happening. It's not going to happen. And so what am I supposed to do? Say, get away from me? That's not the way that I was raised. No. That's not the way that's not where my faith is. And that's not what I believe about people. I might disagree with somebody, I might believe that they're wrong, but I still accept them as people.
Mm-hmm.
And the funny thing of it is that gay people who enter into relationships, heck, they're a whole lot more faithful to one another than straight people are.
Sean, what are your thoughts on that?
You know, I even just going back with me graduating in 14. Um, I know for a fact that there were people that I went to high school with that
Yes.
were gay that didn't come out while they were in high school. They waited until they were in college to actually come out, if they even have. Some I do know um, who are still not fully open to the people that they knew, growing up, maybe to close friends and stuff like that. But because of the alleged stigma and taboo that might come with that, being in a small town and being gay as a kid, growing up, um, I where I grew up, um, I was never was a homophobe or never ever had an issue with gay people ever. Um, I definitely like didn't understand um, the power of words and words I use freely, growing up just out of pure ignorance. It was, and just not understanding what those words meant to certain people and how they could affect certain people. And I think that's like not just me, but across the country, there were a lot of people like me who didn't understand truly, what the power of words meant and how it might be making other people around you feel. And so that's why so many like either friends or people that you knew stayed closeted, just because they just might have been scared about losing friends or how people might judge them.
Right.
I was a manager at a gay bar in St. Louis for about a year.
I forgot
And the
about that.
stories that I was told, on slow days, if I was in on like a weekday afternoon and talking with typically if it was like retired crowd that came in that were gay, I heard so many stories um, just about what they endured and went through, um, families disowning them, from friends leaving them, from being beaten up. I met a friend within the first week of knowing him in Jeff City was assaulted outside of a bar by a group of men after he was out dancing with his boyfriend at a bar in town one night. Were assaulted by a group of men and were called all kinds of different slurs and things like that. So it's 2021 and those kind of things still happen. Um, but now I know that in high schools, at least like the ones that I recruit in, there's openly gay individuals, openly trans students. I know that even at Clopton, I've heard that there's
Yes.
openly gay
Yes.
students and trans students, and I think that kind of stuff's awesome because that means that there is progress. For me, I remember, I'm probably wrong when I say this, wasn't Iowa like the first state to legalize gay marriage or one of the first to legalize?
California was.
California, okay.
Yeah.
I remember when Iowa did it was kind of such a shocker for a lot of
Yes.
people because
They were number two.
it
They
was
were like the second
yeah,
one. Yeah.
Midwest state and kind of right smack dab in the middle. And for me, it was such a victory.
So let me put this to you
Because
this way then.
mm,
With with the generational gap, though, I mean, this has been kind of a mystery because it now, and Tim and I can attest to this. Now, you go talk to our father about this, and that's a whole different story. I mean, when you get in, and I mean, Dad, our father's at the tail end of that greatest generation. He's at the tail end of that, and because he was,
He's actually part of that silent
yeah,
generation, because you
he's
said they were
right.
born
He was born
28 to 45.
yeah, he was born 1934, and so
mm,
he's kind of in that and with that, I mean, and again, I with the early part of the silent generation and the mid part of the and the last part of the great, I mean, the greatest generation. I mean, there's not a lot of those folks left around, and but you look at that generation and they I think they shake their heads at stuff, and it's harder for them because when you look at it, they lived a good part of the 20th century, And coming into the 21st century, that's just one of those issues that they still shake their heads at. And I think it's homosexuality was because it was never, and I think part of the problem was it was never really talked about, but it's always been a part of our society. I mean, historically, when you look back, we've had a number of, famous people who were in the closet and couldn't come out because of their position of power or where they were at or whatever.
Everybody in the small towns. You talk to some of the older people, like my wife's mother, who's dead. She grew up in a small town in central Missouri, south central Missouri. They knew the guy. They knew who was gay. They knew it. They didn't come out of the closet, but they still knew it.
Mm-hmm. Jimmy, still there?
Yeah, that's kind of like some of the stuff. Like I remember when I worked in Eolia, there would always be like it's funny, and that's just kind of like small towns with anything. Like that doesn't just have to be with someone that might be gay, but like if there's the inkling of like, oh, did you hear about it's like the talk, it's like the gossip, it's the because that was when I'd be at the bar and if there was someone at the bar, then I'd walk to the other end of the bar and then someone just be like, that guy, he's gay, and I'd say, oh, okay, well, do you want a cookie for your observation? Like I don't know what you want me to what you want me to do here. So no, it's kind of like one of those things where, but it's funny because then you go to St. Louis and like when I worked down there and like it's not even a conversation, just because it doesn't need to be a conversation. Right. But to like for the older generation, it's one of those things like some people won't like this answer, but for me, it's like, okay, I'm not going to ask someone in their late 80s, early 90s, to change the way that they feel if that's how they felt
all their life
since they were 5.
Right.
My grandmother was very kind to me, always treated me well, loved me, loved my family, fed me, took care of me, had zero issues. Was a racist woman from the South. That doesn't make me think anything less of her because those thoughts didn't pass on generationally. Now, I can't speak to any actions that I know that took place during her life. I don't know if there was anything. I don't know if there was negative. I don't know. I will never know. But my memories were pleasant, and those are the memories that I hold very dear to me because I loved her and I cherished her quite a bit. But I couldn't sit there and just be mad at her because that was, her parents, and how far back does that go? So it's when people, especially when younger people, like people in their teens or early 20s, that make these like demands that people that are in the last stages of their lives are supposed to change the way that they've felt their whole after think like it's not gonna happen. And then so I think it's just like people that younger people especially get very emotional and angry about it.
Yes, they do.
And that's the big getter for me. It's like, look, this person hasn't affected you your whole life. And I understand where you're coming from. Like, well, you want them to think this way. You want them to, do better, be better. And it's like, look, a lot of them will not. It doesn't matter what some teenage kid, some 20-year-old kid yells at them, screams at them. Well, it's not going to happen.
Do you think, Sean, and Tim, I'll ask you this too. Do you think, so when we get in, with Sean, with you being millennial, and I've seen this now with being in education as long as I have, do you think that the younger generations are creating a us versus them? They don't know what they're talking about. We've got to convince them what what we think is right. I mean, do you think that is part of the generational divide? Is that, oh, those old fogies don't know anything, or those older people, even between Gen Zers and millennials, there's this I think there's this disconnect because they're like, oh, you guys are out of touch. I mean, do you think that exists?
I think I was thinking about generation gaps and stuff. I think a lot of things have to do with how you were raised. I've got people that I know that are accepting of other people. They're kind. They raise their kids to be that way. Their kids are that way. And I know other people that are divisive. They're divisive about everything.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't get along with anybody. They don't get along with their own kids. Their own kids don't get along with anybody. I think environment.
Yeah.
Are there differences between generations? Oh yeah. Yeah, there's differences between generations, but I think environment has a whole lot to do with it as well.
So when we bring that point up, and I wanted to tie this in with it. So generational differences are most evident in a key set of demographics, and this is from the Pew study, religious. I'm just going to read this: religious identification and religious belief. In Pew Research Center's 2004 religious landscape study of more than 35,000 adults, nearly 9 in 10 silents, so that's the older than the boomers, identified with a religion, mainly Christianity, while just 1 in 10 were religiously unaffiliated. Among boomers, more than 8 in 10 identified with a religion, while fewer than 1 in 5 were religious nuns. Among millennials, by contrast, upwards of 1 in 3 said they were religiously unaffiliated. And already wide generational divisions and attitudes about whether it is necessary to believe in God in order to be moral and have good values have grown wider in recent years. 62% of silents say belief in God is necessary for morality, but this view is less commonly held among younger generations, particularly millennials. Just 29% of millennials say belief in God is a necessary condition for morality, down from 42% in 2011. Sean, what's your response to that?
It's an interesting one. I see exactly, like, I see those numbers and just people that I know and interactions. Like I definitely see a bigger gap between the older generation who have faith or claim faith and the younger generation by far. The reason why, there's a lot. I think there's so many different factors that go into that. For someone like myself, who I am religious, I believe in the Christian faith. Now, my views are different than some. And I remember in high school specifically, I was ridiculed by individuals, classmates, some teachers even, mainly is one particularly, but for having the beliefs that I did. It wasn't. But I've always like believed in myself as like an individual that believes science is the human way that we explain how God did things. Like the evolution, like the theory of evolution, I believe is just the scientific way to explain how God created the earth and created man. That for some, that's not the, and that's fine. But for me, I've always felt comfort in how science can explain God's work. For me, that's always been comforting to me, because I'm not a big believer in chance and happenstance. Like the fact that we exist is not just a miracle in science, it is an impossibility in science. And so, and some people don't believe that. Some people have a number, and that's fine. That's fine. But for me, what I see around me is I don't, for me personally, I can't stress this enough, but for me personally, it's the science that we have that shows why we're here is God's work for me.
Right.
Now,
You're
me
among
personally,
I think you're among the minority in your group though with that thought.
yes, and there are others that I know personally that had a really bad experience with religion, and maybe not religion itself, but religious individuals. That's a big thing. I think from a lot of people my age, the big getter and why they are not religious is because either how their parents or people that they knew that were older than them reacted to
Right.
religion and how they treated religion. A lot of people I know like had if they had a bad experience with someone or
They just
um
they just generalized the
it
whole
just it
yeah.
yeah, and it turned them off for so long because I know for some people like their experience with religion was like really bad. I'm talking like people should be in jail ghost kind of bad. And like if that was the their upbringing of like what religion was like when you're around the church, these kind of things happen to you. I completely understand why there's that separation.
And
Um
I think that the and Tim, you can I want you to come in on this too because
I've got something definitely to
yeah,
say.
and
yeah.
I think the disconnect really started historically speaking with my brother's generation because the church, the church had been institutionalized in United States society, mainstream society for so long that when something came along and bucked against the established norm, it just all went haywire. And so instead of people looking, I mean, you had a small percentage, I think, of Christians who said at the time, okay, we're going to look at the sin. We're not going to look at the sinner because when this study says, okay, well, you need to use God as a base for morality. Well, some people say, okay, well, I have good morals, but I don't base them upon Christianity. And what my brother said earlier, and I'm going to let him talk after this, and Sean knows this about me. It is not about religion. I despise that term too. It is about relationship, the relationship that one has with God, with Christ as their Savior in their heart. That they can. That's what they move forward. And for a while, the generation before Tim and I, it was you are going, and like you said, some people had, even within your generation, people had this negative experience of saying, you're going to believe this because it is the way it is. And if you don't believe this, you're you're a bad person, you're a terrible person, and I've told kids this all along. Look, you're free if you don't believe it. If you're just doing it to get people off your back, then you really don't believe it. It's just
No,
to
that's right.
yeah, and it gets people off your back. And you know, and today I think within the last, and Tim's seen this, and I'm sure you've noticed it too, Sean. Within the last 7 years of my life, I've kind of changed my perspective on how I approach people and just say, look, there are people just like me who mess up in different ways. What's in my book, when you cross over the line, in religious circles they call it sin, and I mean sin is sin is sin is sin is sin is sin is sin. There's no good sin or bad sin, and yet some people are making this, and I'm afraid for the religious right that does this, and this spans across all generations from the from the silence to the boomers to the, I mean, the far religious right does this thing of just saying everything else is wrong, our way is right, you're going to go to hell in a handbasket, and that's it. So, Tim, what's your thoughts on that?
Well, I was going to go back to what Sean said. My question is, and some people may think, older guy, 62. But my question is, who hasn't had a bad experience with the church?
Mm.
Who has not had a bad experience with the church? I'm a born again Christian, not afraid to admit it. I don't. I was. I was conceived Southern Baptist. Okay. I was conceived Southern Baptist. And if you're Southern Baptist, I'm sorry. I mean, I've went to Southern Baptist churches on and off all my life. I did go to Methodist church for several years, but the thing of it is I'm to the place anymore where I don't identify with the denomination. I just don't. Now, I go to a Hispanic church here in Sedalia, one I helped start 4 years ago, and stuff and things. But when somebody asks me who I am, I ain't going to say Southern Baptist. I'm going to say I'm a born again Christian who believes in the Bible. And as far as what who says what, the religious right or whomever, you know, I'm not taking somebody else's word for it. I want to read it for myself.
Right.
I want to read it for myself. I have the right to understand it for myself.
I think that's like one of the big things too, is people are inclined to have their own experience. And unfortunately, there's some people and how they practice, it's like, if you don't think of it this way, you're wrong. And that is such an issue. Like very recently, this is actually a real conversation I just listened in on, was kind of a part of it, is more of the outside looking in. But these two individuals were discussing their church experience, and one individual hadn't really been in the church much of their life, had a religious family, but it was never really their thing, and had recently joined the Catholic Church. And the reason why they joined the Catholic Church specifically wasn't because it was like Catholic Church is the right thing and that's what I want. It was the Catholic Church is close to my home. I have family members, new family members that are a part of this church. I love the community. We get together weekly. I enjoy the service. I enjoy the sermon. It has brought me closer to God, and I enjoy my time there where I had not enjoyed my experience in other churches previously. And the other person was a Southern Baptist who said, it just sucks that you're putting in this work to still go to hell. And I was just, I like was flabbergasted. And they're like, and just going on of like, that they believe this and this and this, and that's not right. You need to believe this if you want a chance. And this person just was like, I'm not having this conversation with you. I enjoy church. Where I go to church, I enjoy the people. And this church has brought me closer to Jesus. And from my understanding, that is the most important part of this whole shebang. Not about this, that, or the other, but just this.
One of our listeners, Sean, if I could, and thank you, Katie Koenig, for tuning in with us. She said, so coming from someone who was born in Generation Z, 1997, my direct father being at the end of the silent generation, 1945, I felt I was never raised with that generation's mindset morally. Economically, absolutely, but ethically, I felt I was raised to know everyone is different and can be different. Not sure if that's because he had lived through 4 generations before me and has seen and met so many different people, different than a parent to a generation only 1 or 2 away from them, because people's morals many times change over time as you get older. And yes, thank you for that, Katie. I definitely believe in that. Go ahead, Sean. I'm sorry I interrupted you with that.
Well, no, and it just like it goes like conversations like that just kind of make me think of like, and whether it would be high school or anything like that. If every school or every place, when you're young, because again, we've talked about this. When you're young, that's like the most influential time in your life, of kind of where you make those decisions on kind of what route your life might take. And not say that you're stuck with that, but that's kind of generally when you're young is where the seed gets implanted and where you kind of go from there. And I remember, knowing people either close to me or people around me, if there were people that were religious and if they were the holier than thou kind of religious, like what I'm doing is right and I'm perfect and this, that, the other, but then people knew like kind of, what they were doing out on the weekends where they're preaching to me during the week, but they're going out drinking on the weekends, partying with people in their 20s when they're 16, 17, and this, that. It's like that kind of influence can flip someone's light off for the rest of their life. And I think that's, at least for me, I see things like, for me, one thing I've done that I've actually started enjoying is I've started meditating. A simple meditate in my thoughts, and oftentimes like I'll think of a prayer while doing said meditation. And it was a buddy that meant no harm by it, but I had talked to a friend who's also religious and said, yeah, I started meditating while and using that to help further my relationship with God. And they looked at me like it was crazy. They're like, that's not that. They're like, that's like Buddhist shit. You don't need to be doing that kind of stuff. Like, that's weird.
Right.
And so it's little things like that can be like, I am strong enough in my faith to know that kind of stuff doesn't bother me. Mm-hmm. But there are some people that could be the switch for them to be like, you know what, then screw it. If what I'm doing is not enough for you, then why bother?
One other issue that I do, and I think this will probably take up the remainder of our time tonight, which I thought was quite interesting, and this is the views of the scope in government, trust in government, and economic inequality. But I'll just read a little bit here. It says, there are also generational differences in the views of the government safety net. Millennials and Gen Xers are more likely than boomers in silence to say that government should do more for the needy, even if it means going deeper into debt. And millennials are more likely than older generations to say it's the federal government's responsibility to make sure all Americans have health care. However, trust in government is low across younger and older cohorts, and majorities across generations say they are frustrated rather than angry or content with the federal government. Roughly half of boomers, Gen Xers, and millennials say that economic inequality in the United States is a very big problem. Silence are less likely to hold this view. And I'll start with you, Tim. Where are you at as far as how much government? What do you think people in your generation believe on the scope of government or the trust in government and economic inequality?
Yeah, I think it depends on how old you are. When I'm part of the hippie generation, man. Mm-hmm. I mean, I wasn't. They were just a bit older. Actually, a lot of them were just a bit older than me. I was towards the tail end of boomers. And our aunt, who just passed away here not too long ago, she was 7 years older than me. She was actually part of the hippie generation, and a lot of us, a lot of my generation questioned the Vietnam War. They saw Watergate and began to question government then. I believe that as you get older, some people think, man, things are getting weird. Man, things are getting weird. It's because of all those people who do this, or all those people who do that. We're too pluralistic. We're too. I'm just going to tell you the way that it is. A lot of people, I think, white America has less of a hold on the way things are than it used to.
Yeah.
And people are ticked,
right,
because they don't have as much power as what they had, and their power is infringed on by blacks, Latinos, Asians, Hispanics, which is the same thing as Latinos, so to speak, but women having more power, and things, and so there's a lot of people that are ticked because of it, but I'm not one of those people. I'm just not, and never will be.
Do you think? I think that the challenge. That's a great point, Tim. Is when people are afraid of the challenge to the established to the established view of, okay. And I told our kids that a couple of weeks ago in classroom that you know we in the middle of Pike County, Missouri, don't know squat about what African Americans go through. And I had an African American student who wrote an essay about just political view and political belief. And one of the things that this person said was, I cannot speak up on my political view or on my stance of racial relations for fear of being, fear of retribution from white students. And I told her, I said, you shouldn't have to feel that way because there's those generations of people who said, oh well, Martin Luther King did his thing back in 1968. Oh, they got everything they want. What else could they want? And it's still how we turn blind eyes to racial inequality, and then the fact that we're what's bad about it is we trust the government, but we don't trust the government. We think, well, we'll let the government take care of all the racial stuff. When in essence, it's an issue that we have to deal with as a whole, as society. And I think, and like Tim said, I think boomers are starting to come around that corner and say, okay, well, maybe we do need to change our way of thinking. Maybe there is some things that we need to adjust. But yet, saying that, you still have that other hardcore, ultra right wing who say, no, we want to go back to the way things were in the 60s and in the 70s. And when
racism is not going to die.
No.
It will continue as long as there are people. As long as there are people. Ahmaud Arbery's trial is coming up, and the defense that these guys are using is a law from the 1860s.
Yes, I was reading about that. That blew me away.
That's unbelievable.
That blew me away. Sean, what do you think on this?
Yeah, I love the point that Tim made, because I think he's right. I think that with some there's I've said it before on this podcast, when people have power, they don't like to give up power. Our government's a big advocate of that. Once you have something, once the people allow you something, you do not wish to relinquish that power. For some, and older, and even in the younger generation, I look at all the people that Trump spooked. Is literally the ideology of if the great white loses power, then all hell will break loose. And I think that's a real fear, and you see it. I think you see it, and it's one of those things. Again, another great point is racism will never die, because the one thing that really gets me is racism, not a new concept. Racism has existed since humans have existed. That's a fact.
Amen. That's right.
And that's one of the things that gets me. I'm not an individual saying that we need to tolerate racism.
No.
I don't think we should accept racism. But I do believe people need to understand you will not get rid of racism. Now, in a perfect world, yeah, I wish we could. But because we can't, there needs to be other routes. I think we've talked about this before with like cancel culture. I think that, everyone wants to be the most woke in the room at times.
Mm-hmm.
And, sometimes people bury their allies. Maybe they're mistakes that were made from their allies before they knew better. And they've changed and they've grown and they've learned. And I'm not saying that people don't need to be held accountable for their actions in the past, but if you have a good ally and maybe they said some things when they were younger, or maybe they just, maybe they were adults, but maybe as an adult, even though they knew this, that, that's not the right thing to say, maybe they never had anyone tell them, or it was never important to them in their face of like, hey, this affects me, this hurts my feelings, this is wrong. If they never had that, and they're like, oh crap, I see where I went wrong, I see that I was mistaken, and I apologize. And then they have growth. That's the issue.
So do you think
young people?
Do you think that racism then is something that if people, as they mature and they see things, as they, what's the proverbial saying, you walk a mile in a man's shoes? Do you think then, Sean, that that's just a part of maturation and not
Well,
just a
so
generational thing?
so look at it like, okay, so we talk about we've talked about gangs before. People always wonder like, why would someone join a gang, right? When you know the trouble, the risk, that everything that comes with joining a gang, right? But let's say you're a lost kid growing up and you don't really fit in and you don't mean any harm, but then you know you might feel defenseless and you might be like, I'm not a bad guy, but I'm getting picked on. This has happened to me, I made this mistake. And then the people that are there for you are these gangbangers and drug dealers, and they've got your back and they have your support, they hear out your problems, they're there for you, right? And then boom, you have another gang member that's now doing the same shit that the
Mm-hmm.
rest of these people are doing, and now you have more issues. It's the same thing when it comes to like some of this like mentality of this mob, and why we see so many people kind of like, if they are, quote unquote canceled, why they might lean more towards that extreme side is because, like, let's say if you're someone that maybe you said some shit growing up as a kid and it wasn't right, right? We all make mistakes. I've made those mistakes. And you get older and then you learn. And then you really get to understand what exactly the power of words have, like I said before. And you get it, that you finally understand, like, hey, I made a mistake growing up and I wasn't quite mature yet. And you become an ally and you are on the side of that movement. And you think it's important. It's super important to you. But then your dirty laundry from 10, 20 years gets dug up. People are like, look what this person had to say all this long ago. And now you're like, I was doing good. I had changed. It's not how I thought. And this is, that's not who I am. But then the people that, but now you're ousted. You're not in that group anymore because of what you said all the way back then. But who's there for you? These people are like, hey man, we got canceled too from this, and now we can bond together. Now we're together, and that's where that divide comes from.
Well, and that
It is.
one of our, by the way, I mentioned milestone follower Colby Coleman said race is used as a division tactic,
Mhm.
and and I think part of that ties in with going back to about the powers that be. I hate to say this, but and according to this and reading it some into the study, I think this study kind of points out the same thing too, is that less government is better, but you know they would rather just have, the Gen Xers would just rather have a big government, and they're using this racial divide as a means to keep power. And even if we said, I totally agree with that, Sean. Even if we said, you know, 20 years ago, you know, I'm not the same person I was 20 years ago. My brother's not the same person he
Mhm.
was 20 years ago, you know, and I think that but in this generation of, like you said, the cancel culture, they will use that then as ammunition and just say, boom, this guy is a racist. Look at what he said 20 years ago. Forget the fact that he may have had a come to Jesus moment somewhere along the line, generate. And again, this is where the generation gap can stub you in the toe because, when you were neck deep in your I mean, when I was in high school, I went to school in a little town in the middle of Morgan County, Illinois. Okay. There was one place that had black people in Morgan County, Illinois, and that was Jacksonville. Other
Mm.
than that, we didn't see black people. And one of the greatest things that could have ever occurred to me is when I went to Hannibal Grange College, where they had a large percentage of black people who they drafted for sports. And my mind just totally took on a new perspective when I'll tell this story. So when I was going to Hannibal Grange College and I was going into my first week, got in the elevator to go up to register for my classes. This big, I'm 6'5", every bit of 320 black man gets, and he's wearing, by the way, wearing a 3-piece suit, but he's full on beard hair, and I am intimidated, and all of a sudden I'm like, okay, wait a minute, what's wrong with me, and what's wrong with it? And that guy actually ended up being one of my brothers in our service fraternity in college, and ended up being a great guy to me, and it taught me a lot of, like I said, maturing in your generation. I think can can cause this gap in our generations to kind of come in if people would just wake up and smell the coffee.
Mm-hmm.
You guys talk about cancel culture. Come on.
Mm-hmm.
Let's get real. I know it's true, and I know people hold people accountable for something that they done 20 years ago. But how would they like for us to dig up stuff about them from 20 years ago? There isn't anybody who doesn't have skeletons in their closet. Come on.
Mm-hmm.
Get real. Get real. We all grow. We all grow. We have to work together. We have to accept one another. Yeah, I mean, I hate bigots. Well, I don't actually. I hate being a
Bigotry.
bigotry.
Yes.
I hate bigotry. But I hate bigotry. Bigots are people who haven't just seen the light yet, and they're just holding on. But can a bigot change?
Of course.
I do believe that they can, and to tell you the truth, I think the best way is for them to realize that they're forgiven, that God forgives them,
Right.
that there are other people who can forgive them, that there are other people who can accept them, and whenever they see somebody who's different from them, accept them. Sometimes it doesn't. A light doesn't always come on, but it does for some people. And if we want the world to change, then we got to allow the world to change. We can't condemn people for what they did 30 years ago.
And so to tie up this whole thing, we're getting close to our time here, but to tie up this whole thing, and just closing thoughts from you guys. Generationally, is it a generation problem, or is it? I mean, are all these differences in opinions? Is it a? Is it wrong to characterize generations into these groups and say, okay, these people feel this way, these people, or is it an individual problem that some people are just going to? I mean, they're not going to come to it as a generation on their own. I think it's got to be individuals. I mean, what do you guys think? Is it a generational gap, or is it an individual problem, or how do we start to move towards a solution to this gap?
Honestly, I believe it's a combination of things. It's a generation, it's environment, it's personal decision, it's how threatened that you feel or how comfortable that you feel. You got to feel comfortable in your own skin.
Yep.
Sean, I think it makes a lot of difference.
Sean, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm with Tim on this one. I think that generational gaps, involves some. Not everyone in each generation is the same. Not everyone from each demographic of the world is the same. And I think that if we worked more towards hey, I can forgive you for thinking this way, or I here's some constructive criticism, but I'm not going to completely think that you need to be wiped off the face of the planet or your livelihood needs to be ruined by just what you might say or think. Then I think, like Tim said, forgiveness is the key to making a better world. And I'm not saying that we need to forgive people for doing, incredibly heinous acts and things like that, but because I think there's a difference. And I genuinely do think that if we came together and just, instead of the conversation being of you're done and here's why you're done, of, hey man, this is how you can grow and this is why you should grow and this is why you should change and be held accountable, but not, the mob mentality needs to stop. And because I think a lot of individuals think it's them versus us, and then that turns into that mob,
Right.
generational mentality.
Right.
But not just generational. It's cultural, man.
Mhm.
I've been around people who just I've been around people who think all Democrats are evil.
Mm.
I've been around other people who think, gosh, those Republicans, they are so closed-minded and stuff. And they're not giving people chances. They're not giving people opportunities. They're not seeing people as individuals, as people.
Well, I think that this has been a good discussion as usual. And
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Tim, thank you so much for joining
Hey,
us.
thanks
It
for
was a
inviting
blast.
me on, guys.
Yep. And as usual, please visit our lovely sponsors again. Remember, VanBebber and Son discount. If you mention this, you get 10% discount. Our good buddies over there at American Tradition Coffee. Sean is getting ready to do some rebranding, and so and our brothers over at Four Deep Sports, again, give them a look and listen. And
Yeah, guys, make sure, please, you check us out on Podbean, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, right here on Facebook and YouTube, wherever you guys get your podcast from. Thanks again. Please give this a like. Again, we've said it 100 times. It'll be a broken record. Give us a share. Tell someone you know about us if they haven't listened to us. The more we grow, the more we can do. So we definitely appreciate our fans for listening in. Andy, Tim, it's been a lot of fun. I can't wait to talk to you guys again. And from here, from all of us in the Voice of Reason, we will talk to you guys next week.